What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my certified fantabulous co-host Grant Hughes, but I am thrilled and honored to be joined by the also certifiably fantabulous Katie Heindl, one of my favorite writers just of all time, but of course in the hoop sector. Katie, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing really good. And it's so nice to be back on, man. It's been a long time.
It was too long since I have a rule where I try not to harass people more than once a year to come on, because podcasts are long and like people, they got stuff to do. And I can't believe it's been so long since I had you on. So thank you for coming back on. You're always so gracious with your time and answering me so quickly. So I'm very excited to get to catch up with you.
Oh, of course. It's the pleasure's all mine.
How is the off season treating you? I think I saw, unless I'm misremembering, were you really in Vegas for 11 days or 9 days, whatever it was?
I love that it's becoming like an urban legend and the days are
really
just, there's more days. Were you there for 2 months? No, I was there for 9 days, which is a wild thing to say out loud. Usually my ideal summer league time, which I feel like is already much longer than most people's ideal summer league time, is 5 days. Because it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sicko, but I really like being in the mix. But I was extended to stay through to some of the W All-Star stuff, which was super fun. But it was also kind of invigorating, though I felt like such a zombie by the end. And I was such a decrepit husk. And then I was seeing like friends who cover the W coming in super like fresh faced and just like ready for Vegas. And we're like, what's up? What do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. I live here now. Like, follow me. But it was very fun.
That's a really long time to be in Vegas. I don't think the longest I've been in Vegas, and I've never been to a summer league. Years ago, Bleacher Report kept trying to send me, and I was able just to shoot it down. Like I had no desire to go. Now they don't even ask me. I think I was 4 or 5 days the longest I've ever been in Vegas. And I guess if you have stuff and work to do, it could technically put 9 days is a really long time.
Nobody's got like that much work to do though. Like even the times I've been down and I've like been writing off, like usually I will write after, which is great. Like I go down typically with Yahoo Sports Canada and they're just like, yeah, we get it. Like you come back, you got to decompress a little bit and then you'll kind of do all the writing that you got to do for us. But the times I have been there and like working off games or, have other interviews kind of pop up, you still kind of finish those. And like, no one's ever like, I don't believe that people are like, I'm just going back to my hotel room to work. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah. Especially the first like 2 to 4 days there or whatever. Because like it's a very big, we'll call it networking is probably the best
networking. Word. It's networking. It's wandering around, running into people. Feels like a weird summer camp, like a really twisted summer camp. I think you'd like it. Even if you don't like Vegas, I feel like maybe you should give it another shot, Dan.
I should probably, and I do want to meet up with a lot of the people I've met over the internet, but at that point, I'm just so burnt out from like, and it happens, I guess it doesn't happen during free agency anymore because free agency's over in 5 seconds. So it used to happen during free agency. And so the thought of juggling that with summer league always gave me anxiety. I was too excited to talk to you that I totally butchered the intro. Katie Heindl of the Basketball Feelings Substack fame. If you've not subscribed already, it is, I guess you do offer it for free, but it's worth every penny if you just pay for it. Probably the single most unique like basketball blog. I don't even know whatever we call it. I love it. You do a series called Exits I'm going to ask you about. You're also published at Dime, where we have seen the NBA summer vacation just monitoring. I'm going to ask you about that as well. You're at Yahoo Sports Canada, as you mentioned. You've been published all over the place. You might have like the most bylines of at least anyone I've had on this show. Rolling Stone, Flagrant, Slam, just a great writer. If you have not checked out Katie's stuff before, I don't know what you're doing. So follow her on Twitter at WTEVS. I'm assuming that's whatevs, right?
Is that what
I'm glad I didn't butcher that. So yeah, I apologize. I was too excited. I was like ready to get into it.
It's good. We're just catching up.
You are writing a book though, which I wanted to ask you about insofar as you're allowed to talk about it. I had to Google who the John Jeremiah Sullivan. I didn't know what that was when I saw it was going to be written in the vein of that. And so I'm assuming it's going to be sort of like an essay style chapter separation. And are you able just to give our listeners any insight into, I guess, just what it's about?
I mean, I'll try my best. It's like, it will be similar to basketball feelings in that I think the basis of it is narrative nonfiction. So it's writing about basketball in the way that I already do. And that's why I started the Substack originally, to not kind of lose wanting to write basketball in a way that, I feel like I have a lot of creative freedom in the places I write for, which I'm very grateful for, but I still like to write a very specific kind of way. I don't know how you would call, like, I guess I like the LA Review Books did a review of Basketball Feelings this like a couple months ago, which was still such a wild thing to say, but it was the writer wrote that it was feeling as method. So it was like approaching basketball through the lens of feeling as kind of the predominant way to translate it, and just like break it down and break it apart. And I feel like that is how I have always approached basketball. And I think that's how I write about it. So the book will be like that, though I want to say that, I mean, sometimes Basketball Feelings is essays. Sometimes it's like a real Dear Diary situation, depending on what's going on in my personal life, and as much as I want to like let people into that. Sometimes it's about specific, instances that aren't all that great in the NBA, because I do think, it's important to be critical about the NBA and the people in it when it's called for. So I think the book to me will be an extrapolation of that, but I do want to do a lot of some original reporting. I do want to do some travel around it. I have some ideas for things I've just always kind of, those like big picture stories you always have in the back of your head that you're like, right, I really want to do this, but I don't know where it would fit. Now I kind of finally have a place where it would fit, because it's just my thing. And like my publisher was very wonderful and very kind. Every time I approach them, you know how this goes, Dan, as you would like an editor. You're like, well, what do you think? Like, could it be like this? They're like, that's you. You have to figure that out. It's literally your book.
Is it like there's always these big picture topics rolling around that I think anyone wants to write about when they're in this business? Is it challenging at all finding things to write about that won't become dated by the time the book goes out? Because it feels like that could be a challenge of this league moves so fast and changes so constantly that you have to find a subject matter that is going to endure when this gets published in, was it 2024?
That's probably the goal, maybe 2025, depending on, it's usually about a year. I also used to work in publishing, so I can say it's about a year from when a transcript gets turned in to when it actually, hits the shelves and gets published. So yeah, 2020, late 2024 feels like a generous guess. But you kind of read my mind, and that's actually something as someone who's just like, I love reading, and I've always hated in books that kind of predate themselves, whether it's like in fiction, if there's too many references to like be a pop culture or politics of the time. Same thing in nonfiction with basketball. It's absolutely tough. And I think that's something that I was like struggling with, trying to figure out what would stay evergreen in the things I want to approach in this. So what I'm going to do, what I hope to do, is be as like less referential as I can to actual kind of game to game, season to season stuff. Like those beats I feel like are fine for the newsletter, because it can be, immediately responsive to things that happen in the NBA. Whereas a book, I don't want a reader. One, I want readers that don't follow the NBA or basketball to still be able to engage with it, to still find something interesting about it, to still be able to read it. Like maybe it's an essay that you'd read, in the New Yorker or like New York Times Magazine or like Slam or something. And you're just like, oh, I'm actually just interested in this subject because of the way that it's being explained to me and being told. And I didn't know about it, and now I know something about it. Or because, people are hopefully who pick up the book are going to be predisposed to liking narrative nonfiction. So that will hopefully help me a little bit. But yeah, I think for me, the subject matter that I want to approach is going to be now predominantly based on people's personal stories. Like those might be people in the NBA and kind of around basketball, or kind of concepts and ideas in the game, but not so much like a response or reaction to things that we see in a season, which honestly, as someone who covers the NBA that way, is a little bit tricky to like get my brain out of
turn off
writing that way. Yeah.
You had said or tweeted that you always wanted to write a book, which I find the idea of writing a book so overwhelming. So I'm impressed by anyone who is going to do it. Was this is there an origin moment for this idea? Like, did it come gradually, or is this something like, is this the way that you wanted to, like, through this lens, is that something that you always wanted to write about at length in sort of book form?
No, can you imagine if I was a kid and I was
Well,
like,
yeah, I meant more
this
so
is the
like
book.
in your adult life. If you were growing up as 3-year-old and
I'd love
wanted
to
to
write an
tackle.
esoteric book about basketball. No, I think I just always, I mean, like I said before, I know I've always been such a voracious reader as a kid. As a kid, I wrote like fantasy stories, like fantasy novel, like just for myself. But like that was probably my first foray into like writing fiction. So like this project came about actually like it, I thought it was fake at first. I thought I was being scammed, but I was in Houston covering the All American game, the McDonald's All American game, and I got an email from Adam Levy, who's the publisher, co-publisher at Transit. He'd said he'd read the piece I wrote on the dunk contest in the New York Times Magazine. He'd gone back and read some other stuff. And I actually was familiar with the series that the book's going to be a part of, which is called Undelivered Lectures, which is a sub-series that this independent publisher has. And it's authors that are kind of given free reign to go off on like a specific topic as if it was a lecture, as if it was like a speaking series. But you can structure that kind of however you want. So some of them are pretty concise, some are more rangy. And I have books from that series, which is why it was like such a trip at first. And that immediately I was like, this is a phishing scam. This can't be real, which says more about like our disinclination to believe things, that are good and happen to us. But I never thought, like when I started Basketball Feelings, I never thought it would amount to a book. Like maybe in my wildest, most like private kind of secret dreams, I thought, I could write at length this way about basketball. And that's probably the only way I'd want to write a book about basketball, unless I was writing a book about like Kyle Lowry. That's probably the only other
I'd read that book too.
I'd want to write. Yeah. So yes and no. I guess like, yes, I knew I always wanted to write something. It doesn't make it any less of a like daunting undertaking for sure. No, I didn't know this would be the vehicle for it.
Was it always because you said you kind of used to write the fiction stuff when you were younger? Is it like, I know you were approached about this, but when you were if you were to pick like how you were going to go about writing a book, did you envision that it was at some point eventually going to be nonfiction as you like got into working like this more? Or did you always want it to skew towards fiction?
Probably like in my like secret heart. Yeah, I wanted it to be fiction. And I do write that, but mostly for myself. I haven't yet had the guts to like put that out there other than NBA fan fiction, which is something I still do every year. Now on Basketball Feelings, but started at the Classical with David Roth, is actually how I started writing about basketball. So I guess it's like a weird full circle. But I think, there's things I think we have to be honest about, especially if you're like trying to get a toehold, and whether that's like sports media or any kind of industry. It's certainly like media right now, but to recognize when like maybe by accident, but like you've discovered a gap or like you've figured out something that for whatever reason works and people respond to. Like when I started Basketball Feelings, I was like, maybe 20 people will read this. And it's like, it is like still something that I have to pinch myself and be like, this is wild. Like we're going on upwards of 3,000 subscribers to the newsletter now. And it's still something that like, I try and take as serious as I can, but I also am very heartened by the fact that it seems like there's an audience for it. It seems like I figured out a niche. So like if that niche could be a vehicle that can help me, do the thing I always wanted to do, then it's great. I feel like something I'm trying to get better at is being less like precious isn't the word for it, but like recognizing the result of your work over time, right? That it's like you are hopefully as a writer, especially, if you're a writer building towards something, maybe that's not always a book, but maybe it's like a bigger, broader, more substantial project that's not just like writing blog to blog to blog or like pitching, here and there. So I think this is all to say, I don't know how well I'm like getting this point across, but I think it's like all to say to get better at like giving myself more credit, and that maybe this wasn't the thing I always like thought I would set out to do, but it makes sense to me now why this has happened.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense because I think even on a blog to blog basis, sometimes, or just if you're saying, okay, I need to cover this NBA season, you can get so caught up in the process that,
Mhm.
and writers for the most part are their own harshest critic. So that's not going to help. But also, you just get so caught up in the process, you can't even take the time to step back and appreciate the product or products that you've been putting out. And so to be so invested in like a book that's the culmination of all these different things you're doing is that it needs to be important to be able to take a step back and be like, holy fuck, I did this. Because like it's not just like you're not going from one thing to the next. It's like all those things rolled into one over such an extended period of time. And so I I could imagine that that's probably difficult to do, but hopefully you're able to do it because
Still got to
I
do
imagine
it.
the book's going to be great because
Yeah.
basketball feelings is great.
Well,
I know
thank
you had
you.
mentioned though some of the bigger picture stuff as a
Mhm.
struggle. Are there any other like lessons learned or anecdotes or obstacles or whatever that you can share from like the process so far?
Um, that it's like any writing, I think. A part of me was like, well, I've got to wait for like the perfect conditions to like sit down and write something. And to me, that's like being somewhere that's like isolated and removed from everyday life. But sometimes it's everyday life that I find the most um, generative, I
Mhm.
think, of writing, especially like the kind of writing that this book will be because it is in the vein of basketball feelings, like it is something that when I've had opportunities to travel for basketball and like for work in that sense, I always find it like I want to write a ton off of that, not just like the thing I traveled for, but the trip itself and kind of like the momentum.
Mhm.
So I found that where I'm maybe my inclination is to like complain and be like, I need absolute quiet, like perfect conditions to write this book. That's not the way that it's getting done. I still write long form, like by hand in notebooks when I get stuck.
Oh
Like
wow.
I do that for just like anything I'm writing, but that's really coming in handy with this. I'm not the best at like bouncing ideas off people. I'm kind of like, I want to finish one. I want to finish it all and then like, show it back to my publisher. So I'm trying to get better at like sending stuff here and there and being like, what do you think?
Right.
But also recognizing that, as I said earlier, this is an completely like self guided thing. Like the editorial process and writing a book is so different than maybe going back and forth with an editor on a piece, like a profile piece, or a feature, anything like that. Um, I think there's a little bit more, it's funny, there's like a bit more gravity. And like I'm not saying this is deserved, but when I've like approached people for interviews or like to approach people to ask them to help like for things about this book, the minute you say it's for a book, people are like, oh, okay. um, which again, like I'm not saying that's more deserved or not, that more I think has to do with people's perception of like the seriousness of writing a book versus the seriousness of writing like, a 1,500 word article
Right.
about somebody's like in gay performance or something. I'm not like one is not more important than the other. They're just two completely different things. Otherwise I'll have to like report back because I still have a lot more writing to do.
Well, I am excited for it. Our listeners should be excited for it. I can't wait to when it's out and read it. I wish you the best of luck as you go through the process. I'm sure it'll be
Thank
absolutely
you,
killer
Dan.
though. Basketball feelings, we've already touched on a little bit, but I wanted to ask specifically about Exits, which is the
Mhm.
series you do every year where you're covering these teams. It's like it's not really you're covering their past, their present, and their future, and it's very on brand for what basketball feelings is. But I'm just curious, especially when you're incorporating these like personal anecdotes that add this fantastic twist and you're able to tie everything together. Was there like a genesis for writing this type of series, like a moment where it's like you identified that, oh, this could work, or did you just happen to try it with? Because I don't even know what the first one was that ever went up, or necessarily how many years you've been doing it. But
Mhm.
was there like a genesis of, okay, like I want to do this type of series and cover it this way? Because I think it's very unique. Like it's on brand for what basketball feelings is, but then it's also very unique to like even for basketball feelings.
I like that everyone's like, "Oh, it's on brand for basketball feelings." Then I'm like, "Can you tell me what that brand is?" Because like I don't know, I don't know what it is. But um, I think like the impetus for Exits came through actually a series that I wrote for Dime during the pandemic called Year None, And I still am really proud of those pieces, but those were centered on players who, because it was when the season was suspended for COVID. And it was kind of reimagining or looking at a bunch of different trajectories of guys. Like LeBron was one, Jimmy Butler was one, Kyle Lowry was, of course, one. I think the Grizzlies, the team was one, Chris Paul was one. But it was like what they were going to be. And then the pandemic happened and the season suspended. And it was kind of like imagining what could have happened, not in a fictionalized sense, but just trying to trace, if they had kept going kind of in this trajectory that they'd been on, what could have happened. And I really liked that. It was like, also, it was kind of a more flexible, creative time because there was no basketball going on. So, like Dime and like Martin Rickman and the whole crew there have always been so supportive of just like any idea I'm ever like, how about this? They're like, sure. But that was certainly way more in the vein of what Basketball Feelings is. Probably any other like publication I've written for. But I really liked it. And then I think that probably gave me the same idea the first time I did Exits, this is the third year. So it was 3 seasons ago I started. I'm trying to think what the first one was. It might have been the Nets.
Oh, wow.
It might have been that Nets team because I made a really bad graphic for it because it was like kind of centered on West Side Story. So it was like a still from like the old movie West Side Story and like Kevin Durant. That would have been the Kevin Durant Nets team, right? I think so. Anyway, yeah. But I was like in the same vein, a bit convenient because it's like, okay, season's over. I know Exits will carry me through the off season just with the way that I release them like once a week. Right. So it's like, that would give me something to write on in the summer. I also liked the idea of like giving a little bit of extra time to every team, especially in this sad way. It's like Exits is about teams getting beaten. Like it's about teams losing. And it's like about their seasons ending to them prematurely and exploring why that happened. Sometimes it's about one specific player. Sometimes it's about the team. There's usually like beats of history and kind of a unique history of that region, which I always just like going down wormholes to kind of figure out. There'll be like cultural aspects. There's some ties to art, architecture in a couple of them I can think this year. Just like whatever I'm kind of
architecture, unless I'm misremembering.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like, as you mentioned, sometimes it's like what's going on with me. Weirdly, I can figure out a parallel and not by forcing it. Like I try never to force it, but to try and find a parallel to that team. Because sometimes it's on a theme, like with the Sixers one that I just did, it was kind of like Joel Embiid as Prometheus, but it was also about this like human inclination to persevere when sometimes actually you just want to sulk like Embiid does. And so that I had plenty of examples at the time for that personally that I tossed in there and tied them together as best I could. But I think to me, like and again, like, this, we've talked about this. So everything is so accelerated in NBA media, especially like we don't even really get an off season anymore. Like now is the off season, but like people are still, super fevered to hear about the trades that are still left to be done and want to predict like the season to come. Like there is really no downtime anymore. And everything is just like, you have these moments and then you forget them, like sometimes the next day, sometimes within the same day. So I think the idea of Exits to me was also trying to sit with something a little bit longer. And by virtue of the fact that like, I'm writing these as teams get eliminated, but the playoffs move faster than I do.
Right.
So like only now am I getting into the conference finals, right?
Right.
In the current Exit series, I like the Lakers will be the next team up. So that's like, a lot of this is now like for the NBA, like ancient past. For us, like it is not really so long ago, but it's like a nice exercise, I think, in trying to slow things down.
Reflection is important too, because as you said, it's not even just the acceleration, it's everything's about looking ahead. Is that a lot of the coverage I do, I find myself, maybe not so much on the podcast, but it's writing about things that are going to happen, not living in the moment or
Mhm.
reflecting on what just happened. And so it's cool to see, like, because even when we do like a look ahead series here every year where we do 45 to 90 minutes on every single team gets their own podcast. The numbers on those things are terrible for the most part. Like, no one wants to hear 90 minutes worth of the Charlotte Hornets. But like, I feel like it's instructive for me going into the season. But like, even that's about looking ahead.
Mhm.
And so very rarely do we get the chance to, and that's part of what makes it unique, is very rare is there like this extended reflection on what just happened and what it could mean. And I actually do think that is important, and it fills a space that doesn't really exist. And it feels like today's sports media lexicon.
Yeah, I think everything is, driven by, unfortunately now, I don't want to say everything, I'm not trying to be cynical, but like aggregation and what's going to get picked up and shared around. And there's not a lot of room even for longer editorial, which I think is a bummer because that's the stuff I love reading the most, especially if it's like a player profile that's like, doesn't necessarily have to be tied to anything within the season. It's like sometimes you just want to read a long player profile about PJ Tucker. I'm still waiting to read that one. Maybe I'll write it. But like, there's some guys who are just like, or, athletes in general, where you're like, I'm just fascinated by this person. It doesn't have to be tied to anything. I get why it has to be for the sake of that outlet, wanting to get engagement with that story. But I think there's always room to kind of slow things down and look at things, especially in the NBA when it's like you forget more stuff than you remember in a season. Like,
I'll hear
100%.
people reference something that happened this year, like in a video or a podcast I'm listening to, or somewhere like, oh, like, damn, that happened. And like, it just
You're like, that was
totally
3
blocked my mind.
seasons ago. And they're like, no, that was 2 months ago.
Right.
Yeah.
If you do ever write the feature on PJ Tucker, can you maybe ask him what would be his dream flavored pancake
Yeah.
that he would build? I'd really appreciate the answer to that. Who this year specifically, who has been the most challenging team so far to write an exit for?
The Hawks, unfortunately, I have to say, are always challenging to me because I don't find that much compelling about the Hawks. I'm sorry to say to Hawks fans, I want to, but I feel like they've been repeating. Sometimes I just get because it's like this is the third year now. So a lot of the teams that I'm seeing repeat, I know that they are technically good teams because they keep making it to the playoffs, but the reason they keep falling out is usually the same thing as the season before. Certainly it's that case with the Sixers. The Sixers I am like very fascinated by, even though in that Sixers exits, and I'll repeat here, like someone once unsubscribed from Basketball Feelings, and you can say why. Like, I don't ever usually try and read these things because I'm like, it's okay. Like, I don't need to know. You can unsubscribe in peace if you'd like to. But I read it once and someone just wrote anti-Sixers, like that I was anti-Sixers. And I really thought about it. I was like, am I? Like, I don't think I am. I think that they're so like their problems or like the problems they come to repeat are so obvious to me that it's very fascinating as to why, because it speaks, I think, to a lot of like human fallibility at its core, and just this urge to always be like, maybe we'll get them next year, like this kind of goldfish brain situation. But the Sixers are always challenging uniquely for that. The Hawks were just because, again, I had to try and I found this year, especially like a toehold to dig into something. Who else? I try not to be too precious about teams that I actually root for, and like enjoy writing about. I've avoided some of that this year because this year I've asked guests to contribute. So like I knew I would have a hard time with the Heat. Spoiler alert, I have someone else writing the Heat's exit. But just I knew I would I love that team. I love so many individual athletes on that team that it would probably not be fair. It would probably just be like a glowing, like almost fictionalized review, which I'm sure Heat fans would love to read, but I don't really think that's kind of like fair given the way that I've treated these things now. I found the Warriors last season hard to write because the Warriors won, but did the Warriors win last year? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is what we're talking about.
Was that 2015?
But there's also something about perfection that's difficult to write about. You have to try and find the cracks in something that seems at the surface like perfect and like a juggernaut and a legacy. So that was more about what is legacy and what can that mean, and like how much we want these things to kind of topple. Teams get to this level and then we're like, you've been good enough for long enough and now we'd like to see you fall. So that was more of that, but I can usually find, I can like rev myself up. The Bucks have been tough because like the Bucks are such like a workaday blue collar team that it's like there is personality there. I'm not saying that individual guys don't have it, but as a whole, like under Bud, that team was just like, I don't know, man. Like they're basketball robots, and that's not that much fun to write about.
I can see that. I cannot recommend it enough. Basketball Feelings. Go subscribe to it. The link will be in the podcast and YouTube descriptions, and check out all the exits that you can go back and read. They are compelling stuff. I can't have you on and not ask about the Raptors. And it worked out because I was going to ask you about the Raptors anyway, but then you wrote about them for Yahoo Sports Canada. Is there, like, from afar, it seems like they are very much going through an existential crisis. Is that accurate or an oversimplification? Like, do they maybe just have a better idea of what's going on there than the people like myself who are 30,000 feet away are able to grasp?
No, that feels correct. And I think I would have maybe like pushed against that right up until the end of this past season. And then kind of watching them really like, first I was like, okay, they're just taking a casual approach to the offseason. They're just having a dovetail into it. They're going to figure out the coaching thing first. Cause like it was pretty quick. Like they fired Nick Nurse and then it's like, okay, they're ready to make a change. They recognize Masai came out and said, you know, there was a bigger disconnect than he even imagined. He and Bobby Webster did not like watching this team play basketball, as most Raptors fans also did not like watching this team play basketball this year. He kind of admitted to like having too much of a hands-off approach this past season, and that there were rifts and kind of divides within the culture or team, or however you want to look at it, that also started to clarify as the offseason wore on. But like wearing on, I think is the right word, because the Nick Nurse decision was like, that was the most direct, responsive decision they've had all summer. And since then, I feel like my word is just stalling. And I'm always very like, I like to couch these things by saying like, we don't know. We know maybe a fraction of what's actually going on in a front office. Sometimes trades are taking a long time because like most everything is in place and there's one weird little thing that just like time needs to figure out, or like they can't decide yet. You know, maybe someone is just like waiting. That's fine too. Maybe someone's on vacation. That's great. But like with the Raptors, I will say it really feels like stalling. What I wrote about for Yahoo Sports was that I feel like they keep trying to bank on these anomalies that worked for them in the past, like a Fred VanVleet, you know, like this undrafted kind of like prodigy who came up through 905, you know, like their G League system with Pascal Siakam, like those guys are like, we talk a lot about like generational players, but we don't in this sense. But like those two are so specific in that like that's not going to happen. As a big siren goes by, that's not going to happen again for a really long time. The NBA just isn't really built that way. So but the Raptors had such success with that for such a long time that I think they're like, well, we could just do that again, you know. And like you look at, and this was not to disparage Marquise Noel, who I've really enjoyed watching play, and I think like is going to be such a fan favorite, whether he plays for 905 or the Raptors. But the teams, like, you know, I've heard from the team of them being like, we see a lot of parallels to him and Fred VanVleet. It's like, I get why you want there to be parallels, but it won't be the same thing for you. And like, you know, firing Nick Nurse was necessary, I think, but you've brought in a coach now. And again, nothing against Darko Rakovic, who seems like the most positive person that the Raptors are in dire need of, like a coach of that caliber. But you bring in a coach who has some international experience, but doesn't have any maybe like head coaching experience in the NBA. He has assistant coaching experience in the NBA, but like, again, you're kind of banking on lightning to strike twice because it's what's worked for you in the past. Whereas like, I wish the Raptors methodology was just like maybe a little bit more practical at this point and with some realism. So I think existential crisis works. I think stalling is probably the other easier thing. I think they were a bit blindsided by Fred leaving, but I think that's like, it's pretty troubling if a front office misjudges or misreads a situation by someone who's been that close to the franchise for so long, you know, like
Yeah.
Fred's motto, his like copyrighted slogan is bet on yourself.
Yeah.
He was always going to do that.
Yeah, it's just it's weird how they've kind of boxed themselves into what was considered invention, where it felt like
Mhm.
they had like this very creative vision and then they boxed themselves into it. And the moment for me was at the trade deadline where they gave up a top 6 protected pick for Jakob Poeltl, where it just was like, okay, this franchise feels like it's spinning its wheels and
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily know what it's doing. And of course, the FEV departure is the big one, just because, okay, you now let the guy who assisted on a third of Jakob Poeltl's buckets just leave for absolutely nothing. And as flawed as he was as a quote unquote point guard, is just so instrumental to what you were doing and is not a player. This isn't even like, it's more egregious than flipping Kyle Lowry for the Precious Achiuwa return, just because Fred VanVleet is like in his heyday still, even if people were
Mhm.
disappointed in how he played last season. So I don't understand what the hell is going on there. I've mostly been inclined to just give the benefit of the doubt to Masai. Point being, I picked Precious to win Most Improved Player leading into this season, and that went the complete opposite direction. I feel like this is a much less compelling question now that Fred VanVleet is left. But if you
Mhm.
were running the Raptors, is there like, and I don't mean to oversimplify it into 3 choices, but if it's start over around Scotty, continue this middle build, however you want to phrase it, or eventually double down on what you have in place now, like, is there a preferred route that you would take this team if you were running it?
This is tough because I'm always a bit pragmatic when it comes to rebuild or bust kind of mentalities, because I think what always gets lost in that is like the team's bad now. If you rebuild, it's going to be much worse for a much longer time,
Right.
right? That said, like you got to look at, somebody like OG Anunoby's going to be a free agent next summer. Is he going to also walk for nothing? Like, and I would think that somebody like OG wants to go or be on a team that has a compelling and clear plan for him. And Toronto doesn't really have that right now. I think just as like an athlete who's like in their prime and is like, I want to compete. I want like the most out of my career. It's probably not here. I don't know what's going on in this place. So I think to me, the situation is more like you got handed this half rebuild you didn't really want when Fred didn't resign. You kind of now have to see it all the way through. You're making things pretty bad for one of your for your franchise cornerstone, Pascal Siakam, who's left, by just kind of floating his name around.
Yeah.
Pascal, like I do have a column called NBA Summer Vacation Watch, but sometimes it overlaps with like the real basketball, and that Pascal extended his vacation and didn't come to summer league, rightfully so, because it's just like, why would I don't know what's going on here. Like I might get
Right.
traded. There's no hurry for me to get home to Toronto, even though he said time and again like this is where he wants to play. So the unemotional part of me is like, yeah, you finish the rebuild, finish this thing that like you didn't want to start, but like you're in it now. And if you wait, you're just going to be a mediocre team in a conference that's getting so much better. Like I get, I am a diehard Pistons supporter, but I also look at a team like the Detroit Pistons and it's like they may be a play-in team this year, if not next year. And like, where are the Raptors kind of, and this, I mean that to say like the Pistons and the Magic are who we kind of like anchor the Eastern
Mhm.
Conference in, right? But it's like those teams are actually improving.
Yeah.
Like they are. And the Magic too, like they are improving. I don't know that it's like a Magic to Sacramento Kings kind of parallel this season, but they're on the way up. And like you have to make moves and make compelling and moves that make sense for your franchise and like what you can deliver with the personnel you have. And also like if you're trying to attract, to be realistic about like who you can attract and who you can land. And right now I think Toronto's in a weird middle ground where like they're not really going to be that competitive this season as is. So I don't really think like doubling down and like running it back makes any sense, because what are you running it back to? You've lost
Yeah.
significant like momentum and talent and skill. And just like fundamentally, I don't know how this roster works.
It's going to be clumpy looking, I think.
Yeah.
When you look at their
It's
projected starting 5, it's OG Anunoby's all of a sudden your best shooter, which is like kind of harrowing to think about. I know he's turned into a competent shooter, but like,
yeah, but that's a lot to put on him. And it's like you don't really have the support around him. So I mean, for me, it's like if you can retain Scotty and OG, that is a great point to rebuild from. But like this thing of like retooling or adjusting or just making small, tinkerings kind of here and there, which Toronto's been doing for seasons now. I think since Tampa, it's not working. Like it isn't working anymore. And like the league is such now that you can't get incrementally better every season or you're just going to get left behind.
And I'm totally with you. And I just think Fred leaving just sowed it. Like you need to kind of start over. The pick they owe to the Spurs complicates that a little bit. But I was very much in the like camp of no, double down and try and get better. But there's been the past few years something very Portland Trailblazers-esque where they've been unwilling to make the big swing. It's we'll give up a protected pick for Jakob Poeltl. We're going to bring in Gary Trent Jr. We'll make that trade. But it was never the okay, we believe in this talent, but we're not going to actually act like it type deal. And I was convinced that they were eventually going to make a bigger swing. And you're obviously not, you can't be convinced anymore. And so I'd be with you now, but I think we all, and definitely it happens with me that we romanticize rebuilds. I don't think that they were actually at that point until they let Fred VanVleet leave specifically. We're just like, okay, well now what are you guys even doing here?
I mean, I think they kind of started, it was almost like a slow burn, I think, since they were in their mind trying to enter the Giannis sweepstakes a little bit when like it was the season that they let Marc Gasol, and Serge Ibaka both walk because those guys wanted 2-year contracts and they were only prepared to give them 1-year contracts. And I think that's when you start to drain your talent and you drain a lot of your identity as well in that you haven't like rebuilt that back. That's to me where it started, which is also what I wrote about in that story. But like, I think that was like the slow decline, Yeah,
that's a great point. That was like kind of the almost quick deterioration or slower deterioration of like that championship core, like just losing and they all went to LA basically. And it just feels like they've never fully recovered from that as tantalizing as they've been at times. And so I've gone from the point where I was just found them very compelling to now I'm like morbidly curious as to what's good. Like where I'm not watching out of joy or like genuine curiosity. It's just born in this weird place of just morbidity.
Yeah. You're just like, how does this work? Like, how does this thing get up and move around? Like, what does this team look like on the floor? That's where I'm at.
And I wouldn't even hazard to guess what happens next, just because I never would have predicted that they let Fred VanVleet leave for nothing. And now it's like, well, are they going to do the same thing with OG and/or Siakam? It's just, I have no idea what to expect from them anymore. It's just completely where I'm at. But I'm with you. I wouldn't expect them to be very good as currently constructed.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about some of your off-season superlatives so far. And I'll begin with, which team do you find most compelling for whatever reasons ahead of next year right now?
I mean, I already like floated the Pistons, but I feel like that's so personal. And like, I might be the only person on that island.
I love that you called yourself a diehard Pistons supporter.
I am.
I don't know that I definitely did not know that.
I am. The Pistons are probably why I like Dennis Rodman in that era of Pistons basketball, followed by Rasheed Wallace. Like those were the teams that made me fall in love with NBA basketball.
Okay.
Yeah. Like one, just like this really super ostentatious, like really, larger than life kind of bravado. The other, like this true underdog story, which is like, I'm always chasing that, I think, in my like favorites within the NBA. So, and then I don't know, I just hung on. I think also as a horse girl, as a kid who was a horse girl, the Pistons like demon horse head jersey, that's just burned into my brain. It's like my favorite jersey of all time.
The teal ones from them. I'm not I think we recycle ideas too much, but like that is when you see those jerseys, that's like a real kick in the nostalgic field. I love it.
Yes. Anyway, not the Pistons. I think the Clippers are actually very compelling to me, which is funny because, as you said, they are kind of like Toronto 2.0. Like they've just stolen the blueprint. And you know what? If it works and you can get those guys, great. But I also am a diehard Russell Westbrook supporter. And I feel like you're always like, well, could this be the one? Like, could this be the one where it works? And like, could this be the fit? But a part of me feels like maybe yes, because I think Kawhi Leonard is so technically skilled and proficient and just like wants to only play basketball that he can almost balance or maybe deflect some of Westbrook's propensity to just be himself at all costs, at all times. I also think it will just be a pretty fun team to watch. People felt that way last year about the Clippers, but I do feel that way this year. Yeah, Clippers.
There's something weird about them, which is why they fascinate me, where it's like using load management as an example. When we talk about it, everyone seems to deliver the qualifier that, well, players want to play. It's the teams that are making these decisions. Whatever's talked about with the Clippers, it's always phrased as like Kawhi and Paul George don't want to play.
Yeah.
And like Ty Lue is mad about it. And I find that so strange. And then there's the whole lingering future of like Ty Lue has a few years left on his contract, but everyone thinks that he's just eminently gettable.
Mhm.
Now you're throwing Russ into the mix where he is. I gained a new appreciation for him watching him in last year's playoffs. He's like the perfect person to have when you just don't have enough, because when he's himself, that's someone who can uplift what feels like a lower floor. I just don't know how he functions within a higher like ceiling dynamic. And it's, well, is this the perfect situation for him? Because apparently these two other stars aren't going to play in a bunch of games, maybe by their own choice. They confuse the hell out of me, and they want to add James Harden into the equation. And it's like, all right, Russ is there. That didn't end too well in Houston. They're weird. They're weirder than any team with so much talent should be to me.
They're very weird. Then like the Harden thing feels a little bit to me like they're just throwing money at it. Like the fit doesn't really make any sense. And I also don't think, unless you're like, I was going to be like, unless you're envisioning Paul George is out a lot, but then like James Harden has also shown that, I don't mean he will physically be in the game, but he is mentally checked out, right? Which is like one of the most frustrating things to watch about him, because you're like, when you're good, you're like, it is effortless and it is like a pleasure to watch you play basketball. But then there's some days where you're like, you just don't want to be there. And I understand that too. Like I've also felt that, not in basketball, but in life.
They could certainly use his playmaking, but the idea of adding him to like a team that doesn't play fast to begin with, which is why Russ is intriguing, because he can inject pace into them, is just, this might be a situation of, well, if we can really get him for what we can offer, which isn't really much, even if they're putting everything on the table, well, then we might as well just do it because it's still James Harden. And so why not try it out? That's what this almost feels like.
If they trade Russ, then I'm out on the Clippers. Like if Russ is part of that trade, then I take back everything.
That'd be wild if he gets flipped at the trade deadline for Harden. That would be, even seeing those two on the same team again for a third time would just be weird. Again, weird. That's the Clippers. But
weird is intriguing. Weird is intriguing.
So between the end of last season and now, which team have you changed your opinion on, whatever it initially might have been, the most?
Last season and now. You'd think I would have a good answer for this because of writing exits about most of these teams. I feel like most of my opinions have stayed the same. I think Dallas is still going to be bad. I
love that.
Like I don't care about the Mavericks. I think the Nuggets will be great and kind of like steadily the same. The Lakers, I don't know what my opinion is, but it's just like, this is still a mess. That hasn't changed. I'm just running through teams now.
Go ahead.
No. What were you going to say?
Did the Boston Celtics throw you for like a whirl with everything that they did, just sort of getting rid of their cultural backbone for Kristaps Porzingis of all people?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's like a boneheaded move. Really, like, I don't know. I've seen like, oh, he raises their ceiling. I don't really care. Like, I care so little about Kristaps Porzingis playing basketball, because we also haven't seen, like, since he left the Knicks, him do that like to any team. And I mean, like the Mavericks have their own huge problems. But like, he didn't contribute there at all, I think, in the way that Boston thinks he can contribute. And you've also brought in this, like, to me, like the thing people keep weirdly like skirting over is the fact that like incredible rape allegations against this guy that like they just went away because people stopped talking about them. Yeah. But you've gotten rid of someone who was like the pillar, as you said, of your like great culture. Like, as much as like people who aren't Celtics fans hate admitting there's like a Celtics culture, but like he was it. And now you've bounced him to a team that actually I think he'll do really well on and will embrace him like with such open arms. I think he'll be like such a great presence and kind of exactly what they need. maybe you've done him a favor, but like you've gutted the like chemistry of your team and your franchise. And also just like kind of a cornerstone of how that team plays basketball
Oh yeah.
is now gone. So like this kind of gritty edge that you had is gone because Kristaps Porzingis does not play basketball that way.
Yeah, and even great year last year from Porzingis, but just Marcus, like you're at a net deficit of playmaking by giving up Marcus Smart. Your defense is less versatile too. And so just even from the purely basketball perspective, I'm still struggling to see how it even increases their ceiling. Like it feels like you're banking on him to be what he was for Washington last year, but better than that and in a different way. And it just feels like a very weird gambit to make. And so I didn't like the trade for the Grizzlies either. I was in the minority. I think Marcus Smart, I didn't love it for them, but Boston confuses the hell out of me.
It might be Boston just because of that like confusing move. But the only thing is like when you were like what he did for the Wizards, like that's the Wizards. Like think you have to be.
Where they ended up too. It's not like he carried them to like a top whatever they draft 9th this year.
The team is now like it's like blowing itself up at like out of plus like it to austerity, like to stay alive, right? That team is now blowing kind of itself up from the inside. And like he just made them look better because like look around at what's there. I don't know.
Just for a team like Boston that's going to constantly be playing or thinks they're going to be playing deep into the playoffs, he's such a limited playoff track record too, which is also so bizarre. Is there a team that is shaping up to be like your guilty pleasure to watch or cover or talk about leading into next season?
It might be the Pacers.
Ooh, okay.
But I don't know if it's guilty. I feel like I don't know. I feel like in basketball, you kind of got to own up to the like weird things that you like watching, you know, like whether that's like players or teams. But I think the Pacers to me are starting to kind of look a bit like that. Was it like the 2013, 14 or like 14, 15 kind of Pacers that were like really fast and fun and like super excited to watch, except for now, I think they have such a better fundamental kind of baseline of skill. Yeah, I don't know. I think they will, to me, like, I want them to be that fast and fun team again. I think they deserve to be, but I'm also very intrigued by like somebody like Benedict Mathurin. I think he's just like gonna get better. Miles Turner, I think I'm just like to keep his name out of for one trade cycle. Don't talk about Miles Turner. Hopefully that happens. I'm a huge TJ McConnell fan. Like he's working on even somebody like TJ McConnell, like working on his 3-point shooting, which is what I heard he's been doing, like going into the off season. Like there's a lot of intrigue for me around that team. And I also think they're kind of like eminently root forable. Like you don't have to be like a lifelong Pacers fan to root for the Pacers. They are to me maybe what the Kings were.
Yeah, they should be a fun team. And I love Tyrese Halliburton. And like you said, they are just incredibly likable as well. Look, they have my guy Obi Toppin now who might actually get to play. And so
Obi's great. Yeah. Well. Obi like out of the like sucks for Obi to leave New York, but like probably New York. The New York Knicks were not how Obi Toppin envisioned playing for New York.
I mean, yeah. So I'm happy he gets to. I was very much for Obi Toppin. My guilty pleasure, and it's actually guilty because I don't necessarily want to admit that I would like to watch them. It is the Wizards because I like that they're rebuilding, but there's just like so much. I I'm in love with Bilal Coulibaly. I love the swing, and I think that he hit like a step back jumper in summer league, and I fainted. I'm just like, oh, he's going to be a 4-time MVP, based off everything I think he can do defensively.
He is very cool. He is very cool. Yeah,
but just like you have Jordan Poole and Tyus Jones, and there was Monte Morris was there for a second. DeLon Wright still floating around there. You brought back Kyle Kuzma, and it's I'm a big believer in Denny Avdia, but how is this going to fit in? And so there's a lot of potentially redemption arcs, placeholders, some upside there with the Bilal, but I don't know if it's but like the Wizards just fascinate me. I don't know why. And so that I would classify them as a guilty pleasure though, because I'm not going to admit that very often.
Might be a tough watch. Yeah. I do like that they brought back Kyle Kuzma because I really did not see that happening. But I was like, you know what? If he's happy there and they're happy, like that's all you could ask for.
My prediction would be that they are absolutely going to move him by the trade deadline. That just
Maybe.
felt very much like we didn't want to lose you. They did what the Raptors maybe should have done if they
Yeah.
didn't want to keep their guy long term. Is there and maybe we hit on this with Boston, was there a transaction though or move or storyline this offseason that just floored you the most?
I mean, Boston didn't floor me because it's like I don't have much faith in that franchise's front office. I don't know. And again, this is not maybe on the technical fits of the team. It's just on the more like cultural aspects, for lack of a better word. I'm just trying to be polite. But that move, I think, didn't make it made sense in a like very defeating way, like okay, here we go again kind of way to me. Other than that, like I have to say most of the trades, probably because we hear about them so early, in the sense of like this is a rumor, or like this has been reported to me, or players just like making it clear where they want to go. I'm still like leaving some room to be surprised by whatever happens with Dame.
I think I was surprised by Dillon Brooks's contract just continuously going up. Normally it's the reverse in reporting where they give you the higher number, but he was at like 80 and then it was 84, 86, 88. And he ended up at like, oh, it might get to 90 or whatever. And so that was just, and the way the Brook Lopez stuff in Houston unfolded, they made moves because they thought he was coming. And then he just goes back to Milwaukee. I fave it. Him getting his bag from the team he wanted to stay with.
Honestly, a misread of Brook Lopez, who just wants to like be comfortable and have like not have to move. Like he seems like the most practical, you know? It's like, I don't want to move.
Right. And he was on like the fringe of the entire NBA when he got to Milwaukee. And so there's got to be, then he goes to a runner up for defensive player of the year and NBA champion. So
why would he leave?
Yeah. I mean, so, but Houston, that was the one that Dillon Brooks reporting and then them really thinking they were going to get Brook Lopez was what shocked me the most. The most important one, who so far is the NBA summer vacation watch MVP?
Oh, yeah, that is a good one. Devin Booker has been taking some pretty good trips.
What did you say? Your last one said rustic ass trips unabated. I laughed when I read that line. Yeah.
I saw today, though, I think he's in Italy because he was like diving off a boat. TMC is trying to scoop my beat, and they reported him like he's on a boat with bikini clad women. Say goodbye to Kendall. And there's a picture of him. I'll send it to you after, diving off like a little dinghy, and it looks photoshopped because I'm like, he could not have gotten this much air, and his form is like so precise that I think they like photoshopped him diving, or like his team did and sold the photos to TMZ. But maybe he's a great swimmer and I'm not giving him enough credit. But usually he's like rolling around on an ATV, like up in the woods somewhere.
Right.
It seems like Serge Ibaka has always taken some pretty immaculate trips. I think last he was in Seoul, South Korea, and I don't really know why. It seemed quite mysterious. He just like posted an intersection and like geotagged it. And I was like, Serge, what are you doing there? But I would say like a clear MVP contender has not emerged yet. Miles Turner went away for a really long time. Like he was in Milan for Fashion Week, and then he stuck around Italy, and then he was like taking some personal trips with like him and his GF. He went to his first like Comic-Con, which I guess is not really a vacation, but it seemed like a big occasion for him. And I think he's on vacation again. So he might just be by virtue of like taking the most vacation in the running for MVP. But usually by now there's like a clear contender. And I don't have one yet.
I feel like I would have to default to Boban ziplining by default. Just I didn't know that a human that large
Boban and Paul George, like that might be my MVP moment of like the two of them meeting up.
Friends, like I guess everyone in the NBA knows each other, but when you wrote that they like met up like
in Montenegro too, which I was just like, maybe it was just because someone both told them both that they were there, and it's like such a small place, and like what a weird place to meet up with someone that you're like, well, like, we should have dinner. But it looked like they had the nicest time out together, like the best time.
Another question I want to ask you, I don't know what your title would be that would give you this power, but whatever it is, like the big cheese basketball overlord, if you could change one thing about the NBA, whether it's about the game, the way it's covered, the way it's rooted for, whatever, what would it be?
I could go like, this is tough because I could go extremely serious and talk about the changes that I would really love to see happen. But maybe I'll say I would like chase down blocks to be given like a point system.
Oh, I've never heard that before. And now I'm going to latch onto it to forever.
Yeah. Like, it doesn't have to be a ton, but like, you know, One, I think it incentivizes defense, obviously, which a lot of people complain about. Two, I love a chase down block. It's like chase down blocks and dunks, they flip flop for me. Sometimes I'm like, no, I just want to see chase down blocks. I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't mean it like that. I want a clean chase down block, which is the only way these points would be awarded. But you are incentivizing maybe also the younger generation coming in, play a little bit of defense, get some extra points, or maybe it gets you to. I'm trying to think. Does it just award you points? Does it get you to the line? Does it get you a possession? I don't know, but I think it should be rewarded in some capacity.
I'd be all for that. That and maybe even block jump shots, which are really hard to like. Maybe those should have a point system.
Though, like Wemby, that's like he would just. If you're making that a new category, all he has to do is like stand. I watched him at Summer League just like stand over guys like Dracula, and he can block a shot from anywhere.
That must have been surreal seeing him in person.
It was cool. It was cool. It was more funny to listen to how disappointed most people were watching him, because I think everyone just wanted him to dunk and like do cool stuff like a huge guy would. But like I loved watching him, one, just like move around the floor, like to see him dribbling, like handling the ball when his like he starts from 7 feet up, and to watch guys try and figure out how they can defend him, and even try and like take a swipe at the ball when it's like it's basically being dribbled over their heads. It's like a new type of basketball being played. So I think that was really cool. And he's a really good passer. I thought that was fun to watch too.
I only saw his bad game and I came away from it. I'd said afterwards on the podcast, I was like, everyone was so up in arms about this. I was like, I came away from that game thinking he's going to be one of the greatest players I've ever watched in my lifetime.
It's so cool. It's like, it's very rare to realize and see something in real time. You're like, oh, this is going to change the way that basketball gets played because of one person. Like, it's invariably like they're going to have to adjust. Every team is going to have to adjust for this guy, and it's going to trickle down into just like how things are going forward. That's like, that in itself is very cool.
The final thing, were you able to do the one feeling association for each team? Are you up for doing that?
I'm up for doing it. I didn't write it down, so this is going to be total off the dome.
That's amazing. So, as a backstory, Katie. I'm asking you to give me one word to describe how you feel about each of these NBA teams leading into next season. We begin with the Boston Celtics.
Bleak.
Oh, nice. The Charlotte Hornets.
I maybe should have said bleak for that. Trepidatious.
Ooh, okay, that's a good one. The Chicago Bulls.
Hopeful.
Ooh, the Dallas Mavericks.
This is more than one word, but it's like an inside joke that everyone else knows about except for that one person, and they're that one person. I guess the joke's on them.
The Denver Nuggets.
Stoic.
The Detroit Pistons, who I'm suddenly happy that I included now that I know how you feel about them.
Gorgeous.
Houston Rockets.
Interesting.
Golden State Warriors.
Aging.
The LA Clippers.
Intriguing.
Minnesota Timberwolves.
Fun.
Oklahoma City Thunder.
Crafty.
Ooh. Orlando Magic.
I'm blanking. I've already said intriguing. I've already said hopeful.
Go with optimistic?
Yeah, let's go with optimistic. Thanks for the save.
Philadelphia 76ers.
Tragic.
San Antonio Spurs.
Reliable.
Last and perhaps least, the Toronto Raptors.
Woof. Maybe just woof.
Thank you so much for doing that and for giving me over an hour of your time. It was great picking your brain as always. Are you able to just let our listeners know where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Of course. It was my pleasure. Thank you for saving my brain just blanking on the poor.
I like that it's the Orlando Magic that broke your brain.
I just didn't want it. I wanted it to be correct because I feel like there's something there. You know, I'm not trying to disparage them. We are better than disparaging the Magic. Like, we as an NBA collective, I think, have moved on from that.
Right.
But people can find me. People can find Basketball Feelings at basketballfeelings.com. You can subscribe. You can just read it there. There's a podcast that goes along with it if you are a paid subscriber. You can find me on Twitter at whatevs, WTEVS. It's where I'm posting all my work. I'm on Blue Sky with the same name. I haven't really figured out if I want to use it yet. I am not on Threads.
Ditto. I'm on Blue Sky, not on Threads.
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. Maybe that will be the place. Still on Twitter, begrudgingly. You can find me at Dime. But as I said before, anything I'm writing, I will be aggregating it on Twitter.
Thank you so much again, and rest assured, not only will I be pestering you again in the future, but I will not be waiting 2 years to do so.
Of course, anytime. I'll have to give you the updates on the book once it's done, so we can check back in end of the year.
Very exciting. Thank you.